For centuries, Hollywood told you a lie about the most powerful woman in ancient history. She wasn't a seductress who won wars with her beauty. She was something far more dangerous. She was a strategist. She spoke 9 languages. She defeated the combined armies of Rome. And when she lost, historians literally erased her from history. This is the real Cleopatra, not the myth. The woman who almost conquered Rome. While Roman generals were fighting over power in their republic, Cleopatra was ruling an empire that controlled 1/3 of the world's grain supply. Egypt wasn't just wealthy, it was essential. It kept Rome fed, and she knew it. But here's the part they don't teach you. She was born into a family that was about to lose everything. Her kingdom was crumbling. The Roman Senate controlled her destiny by law. And yet, she became the last ruler of Egypt and forced 2 of Rome's most powerful men to fight over her. In the next 30 minutes, you're going to discover 5 political strategies that changed the course of history. You'll see how she weaponized her education, how she turned Rome's civil war into her advantage, and why, even after she lost everything, Rome's most powerful man couldn't silence her story. By the end, you'll understand why Egypt's last pharaoh isn't just a historical figure. She's a masterclass in political survival that even modern leaders study. Let's start with her beginning. Because to understand Cleopatra, you need to know she should have failed. Cleopatra was born in 69 BC in Alexandria, the most magnificent city in the ancient world. Her father was Ptolemy XII, and by all accounts, he was a failure. Rome controlled him. Rome had made him ruler, and Rome could unmake him just as easily. Her father was so desperate to stay in power that he paid Roman senators a fortune, money Egypt didn't have. By the time Cleopatra was born, her kingdom was bankrupt. The treasury was empty. The people were starving. And she was a girl in a dynasty where boys inherited thrones. But here's where Cleopatra's story changes. Unlike every other Ptolemaic ruler before her, and there were dozens of them, Cleopatra decided to learn Egyptian, not Greek, not Latin, Egyptian. Her family saw the Egyptians as conquered people, servants, below them. They spoke only Greek in the palace. For 300 years, no Ptolemaic ruler bothered to learn the language of the millions they ruled. Cleopatra was different. She studied under the best tutors. She mastered not 9 languages, though some historians claim that, but certainly 7 or 8: Greek, Latin, Egyptian, Aramaic, Hebrew, Syriac, possibly Ethiopian and Parthian. According to Plutarch, the ancient historian who lived closer to her time than we do, it was a pleasure merely to hear the sound of her voice, with which, like an instrument of many strings, she could pass from one language to another. Now, this is critical to understand. Being educated didn't matter if she never got the throne, and she shouldn't have. Ptolemaic law was clear. Her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, was the heir. He was the male. That was the rule. She could study all she wanted, but the throne would never be hers. When her father died in 51 BC, Ptolemy XIII, just 10 years old, became king. Cleopatra, now 18, was meant to be his regent. But that's not what happened. The boy's advisors, ambitious politicians who saw opportunity, pushed her out. They wanted to control the young king, and Cleopatra was a threat. She was too intelligent, too ambitious, too dangerous. So they exiled her, forced her from Egypt, took everything. And that's when she disappeared into Syria with nothing but her mind and a question. How do I get my kingdom back when I have no army, no money, and no allies? Then fate intervened, or rather Cleopatra made her own fate. In 48 BC, Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, was chasing his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean. Pompey fled to Egypt, thinking he'd be safe. He wasn't. Ptolemy XIII's advisors had him killed immediately, hoping to impress Caesar. But Caesar didn't reward them. Instead, he arrived in Alexandria and discovered a kingdom in chaos. A boy king manipulated by regents. A woman exiled from her own throne. Cleopatra saw her moment. What happened next was either the most romantic scene in history or the most brilliant political move. You decide. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra rolled herself up in a carpet, or possibly a laundry sack, sources differ, and had it delivered to Caesar's chambers. Now, before you think this was just seduction, consider what was actually happening. Cleopatra couldn't walk openly to Caesar's headquarters. She had no army. She had no authority. If she tried to approach him publicly, Ptolemy XIII's advisors would stop her. They might kill her. But a gift, a carpet, that's not a threat. That's not political. That's intimate. Caesar opened that carpet to find the exiled queen, alone, vulnerable, brilliant. Here's the genius part. By going to him in secret, she did two things. First, she showed him that she was daring, that she'd risk everything to reclaim her throne. Second, she put them in a private moment together where she could speak directly to him without politicians listening. Within weeks, Caesar had declared war on Ptolemy XIII. He'd chosen Cleopatra. Was it love? Maybe. But it was also statecraft. She'd turned Rome's most powerful man into her ally in the most dangerous moment of her life. While Caesar was fighting Ptolemy XIII's forces, Cleopatra did something her family had never done. She connected with Egyptian priests. Remember? She was Greek. Her family had ruled for 300 years without learning Egyptian or respecting Egyptian religion. The Egyptians resented them. Cleopatra, who spoke their language and understood their culture, presented herself as something different. She didn't just accept Egyptian religion, she embraced it. She presented herself as the living incarnation of Isis, the most important goddess in Egyptian mythology. On coins, on statues, in public ceremonies, she appeared not as a Greek queen, but as Isis herself. Divine, powerful, connected to the land and its people. This was revolutionary. For the first time in 300 years, a Ptolemaic ruler had claimed legitimacy through Egyptian tradition, not just Greek heritage. The result? The Egyptian priests, who held enormous power over the people, supported her. The people supported her. Rome saw her not as a foreign invader's daughter, but as Egypt's rightful pharaoh. She'd won the hearts of her own people without fighting a single battle. After the Alexandrian War ended in 47 BC and Cleopatra had secured her throne with Caesar's support, she faced a massive problem. Egypt's economy was destroyed. The treasury was empty. Rome was already eyeing her wealth. But Cleopatra understood something that many rulers missed. Money comes from control of resources. She reorganized Egypt's entire taxation system. She increased grain exports. Egypt produced a third of Rome's grain supply. She controlled papyrus trade. She issued coins with her own portrait on them, a statement of absolute authority that no previous Ptolemaic ruler had dared make. Here's the key. By making herself essential to Rome's survival, she made herself untouchable. Rome needed Egypt's grain. Rome needed Egypt's wealth. If Rome destroyed her, Rome starved. This is why, even though Rome could have conquered her at any time, they didn't. She was worth more alive and cooperating than dead and conquered. She'd weaponized economics. She'd made her weakness, a small country surrounded by Roman power, into her greatest strength. In 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated in Rome. Cleopatra's greatest ally was dead. She'd had a son with him, Caesarion, and she'd hoped Caesar would name him as his heir. That way, Egypt's next king would be Caesar's blood, giving Cleopatra protection through her son. It didn't work. Caesar's grandnephew, Octavian, claimed the inheritance. Cleopatra's son was pushed aside. Rome descended into civil war. Two powerful men, Octavian and Mark Antony, were fighting for control. Cleopatra had to choose a side. Here's where she shows her true genius. She didn't just pick a side. She picked the side that needed her most. Mark Antony was fighting Octavian. He needed money. He needed supplies. He needed military support. Cleopatra had all of it. In 41 BC, they met in Tarsus, modern-day Turkey. According to Plutarch, she arrived on a golden barge with purple sails, surrounded by servants dressed as attendants. It was theatre. It was power. It was a statement. I am not a desperate exile. I am a pharaoh. Treat me as such. Antony and Cleopatra became allies. Some say lovers. The distinction matters less than the strategy. She'd allied Egypt with Rome's most powerful military leader. For a decade, Egypt flourished. She had a powerful protector. She had peace. While other rulers focused only on military and political power, Cleopatra understood something deeper. Culture is power. She patronized scholars, scientists, philosophers, and artists. Alexandria was already the intellectual center of the ancient world, home to the great library and the museum. Cleopatra made it even greater. She funded astronomical research. She supported medical studies. She commissioned new temples, not just as religious monuments, but as declarations of her piety and legitimacy. Why? Because culture lasts longer than armies. Culture survives wars and defeats. Culture changes how people remember you. By positioning herself as a great patron of learning, she wasn't just being cultured. She was building her legend. She was making herself the kind of ruler that poets would write about, that historians would study. And critically, she was showing both Romans and Egyptians that she wasn't just a political operator. She was civilized. She was sophisticated. She was worthy of respect. This cultural authority, this soft power, made her more untouchable than any army could. For nearly 3 decades, Cleopatra had done what almost no ruler had achieved. She'd kept her small kingdom independent while surrounded by the greatest empire the world had ever seen. For a decade, Cleopatra and Mark Antony ruled the Eastern Mediterranean together. They had 3 children. They had wealth. They had power. But in Rome, something was shifting. Octavian, the man who'd defeated all rivals, was becoming stronger. And he saw Cleopatra and Antony as a threat to his vision of a unified, Roman-controlled Mediterranean. So he did what great propaganda masters do. He rewrote the narrative. He told the Roman Senate that Antony had abandoned Rome, that he was controlled by a foreign queen, that Cleopatra was stealing Roman territories, that Antony had left all his wealth to Cleopatra and her children instead of Rome. Most critically, he said Antony had violated his oath to Rome, his oath to Octavian's sister, Octavia, whom Antony had married in a political union and then abandoned. The Senate was scandalized. Rome, which saw itself as the beacon of civilization, viewed this betrayal as unforgivable. Octavian had turned the public opinion machine against them. In 32 BC, Octavian declared war, not on Mark Antony directly, but on Cleopatra. The narrative was, Rome was defending itself against a foreign queen who'd seduced its greatest general. Cleopatra and Antony gathered their forces. They had advantages. She had Egypt's wealth and grain supply. They controlled the Mediterranean. They had support from Eastern kingdoms. But Octavian had something more important: the Roman people behind him. His propaganda had worked. They met at Actium, off the coast of Greece, in September 31 BC. It was one of the largest naval battles in ancient history, and it was a disaster. In the middle of the battle, Cleopatra's fleet suddenly fled. Some historians say she made a tactical decision to save her remaining ships and treasures. Others say she panicked. The truth is unclear, but the result was certain. Without her ships, Antony's forces broke. They lost. Octavian's forces pursued them to Alexandria. The city was under siege. Cleopatra still had choices. She could have negotiated a surrender, fled to another kingdom, tried to preserve herself. But she knew what would happen. If Octavian captured her alive, she would be paraded through Rome in his triumphal procession, the ultimate humiliation for a pharaoh. She would be a trophy. She would die in a Roman prison. She refused. In August 30 BC, as Octavian's forces closed in, Cleopatra chose her own death. The exact method is debated. Ancient sources claim a snakebite, likely an asp. Modern scholars debate whether it was poison. The point isn't how she died, but that she controlled her own ending. Mark Antony, believing her already dead, tried to fall on his sword in true Roman fashion. He was brought to her, wounded and dying, where they had one final moment together before he died in her arms. Then she followed him. The last independent pharaoh of Egypt died on her own terms, refusing to become Rome's prisoner. Egypt was annexed into the Roman Empire as a personal province of Augustus, Octavian's new name. For 300 years, Egypt would no longer be independent. The Ptolemaic dynasty was extinct. Here's the part that makes you angry. After she died, Octavian didn't just defeat Cleopatra, he erased her. Augustus, that's what the Senate called Octavian, he controlled the narrative that survived into history. Roman writers described her as a seductress, a temptress, a foreign queen who'd corrupted a great Roman general. The story became not about her political brilliance, but about her sexuality. Roman propaganda depicted her as dangerous, not because she was strategically brilliant, but because she was a woman who'd seduced powerful men. This narrative served a purpose. It explained Rome's victory. It made her death seem deserved. And it buried the truth: that Cleopatra was one of the most intelligent political operators of her age. For centuries, that's how history remembered her. Not as a strategist, not as a linguist, not as a pharaoh who kept her kingdom independent against the greatest power on earth. She was remembered as the beautiful queen who fell in love with a Roman general. The real Cleopatra, the woman who spoke 9 languages, who understood economics and military strategy, who ruled with intelligence and pragmatism, that woman was almost lost to history. So why does Cleopatra's story matter in 2026? Because it reveals something about how history is written. For nearly 2,000 years, Cleopatra was remembered through the filter of Roman propaganda and male historians who viewed her through a lens of sexuality and seduction. Modern historians, particularly women scholars, have been recovering the real Cleopatra, and she's far more impressive than the myth. She was a linguist at a time when linguistic mastery was the foundation of diplomacy. She was an economist who understood that controlling resources equals controlling power. She was a strategist who navigated between two superpowers and kept her kingdom independent for decades. She was a cultural patron who understood that legacy is built through more than military victories. And she was a woman who refused to be conquered, even at the moment of her defeat. This story matters because it reminds us the narratives we accept as history are often the narratives written by those in power. And when those in power are threatened by someone, especially a woman, they don't just defeat her, they rewrite her story. Understanding Cleopatra's actual history, separated from myth and propaganda, teaches us to question the histories we've been taught. It teaches us to ask, whose story am I hearing? Whose story is missing? What truth has been buried? Today, historians are recovering Cleopatra's actual achievements. Recent scholarly work emphasizes not her romantic liaisons, but her statecraft, her economic policies, her linguistic genius, her ability to preserve Egypt's independence for as long as humanly possible against impossible odds. She's studied in universities not as a romantic figure, but as a case study in political strategy. Her linguistic abilities are analyzed as a foundation of her diplomatic power. Her patronage of culture is recognized as a tool of soft power that modern leaders still use. And her refusal to surrender, not to Rome's military power, but to Rome's attempt to humiliate her, is recognized as an act of resistance. In recovering Cleopatra's true history, we're not just correcting the record. We're recognizing a woman whose intelligence and strategy shaped one of history's most important transitions, the end of the Hellenistic world and the birth of the Roman Empire. Octavian won the battle, but Cleopatra has won the long game. Her name, her intelligence, her strategy, these outlasted his propaganda. This is her real victory. Cleopatra VII wasn't a seductress. She wasn't a romantic heroine. She wasn't the beautiful fool that Hollywood portrayed. She was a linguist, an economist, a strategist, a woman who saw an impossible situation and asked not, "How do I survive?" but "How do I win?" She learned 9 languages because she understood that language is power. She embraced Egyptian culture when her family had rejected it because she understood that legitimacy is built on understanding your people. She controlled grain exports and economic systems because she understood that military force means nothing if your enemy needs what you produce. She allied with Rome's most powerful men, not as a dependent, but as a strategic partner. And when she faced defeat, she refused to be conquered, not just militarily, but in narrative, in memory, in the story told about her. For nearly 2,000 years, her real story was buried under propaganda and myth. Now, finally, we're seeing her as she really was, and she was far more impressive than any legend. Here's what you need to remember. 1. Cleopatra's real power wasn't her beauty or her ability to seduce. It was her intellect. She spoke 9 languages, understood economics, grasped military strategy, and recognized that soft power, culture, patronage, legitimacy, outlasts military might. 2. She understood that power is built on making yourself essential. By controlling Egypt's grain exports and trade, she made Rome dependent on her. By learning Egyptian and embracing Egyptian religion, she made herself legitimate to her own people. Necessity is the most powerful weapon in politics. 3. History is written by the victors, and the victors have agendas. For 2,000 years, Cleopatra was remembered through Octavian's propaganda, as a seductress rather than a strategist. Understanding this teaches us to question all historical narratives and ask whose voice is missing. If Cleopatra fascinates you, wait until you see what the next woman we're covering did. She didn't have Rome as an ally. She didn't have Egypt's wealth. And yet, she accumulated more power than almost any ruler in history. Her story is even more remarkable because almost nobody knows it. And by the end of it, you'll understand why she was considered more dangerous than any army. The next episode is coming soon. Don't miss it. If this video changed how you think about Cleopatra, please like it, not just as a favor, but because the algorithm notices when videos get engagement, and that helps us reach more people who are hungry for the real history, not the myth. Subscribe if you want to see more stories about women whose true history was buried under propaganda and myth. We're recovering these stories, and they're far more powerful than anyone realized. And in the comments, tell me, what surprised you most about the real Cleopatra? Was it her languages? Her strategy with Mark Antony? The way she refused to surrender? Let's talk about it down there.